Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Different Strokes 2022 virtual conference. My name is Austin Willett. I'm CEO of Different Strokes. For those of you who are with us for the session this morning, welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, it's fantastic to have you with us this afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors, Bolt, Bird and Kemp Solicitors. We really appreciate your support for helping us to put on this week-long events of webinars. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Kim Bowler from Michael Page Recruitment. Kim will be talking to you this afternoon both about her fascinating personal story and also sharing her insights into work after stroke. So it's really good to have you with us, Kim. Before we start, just to run through a few housekeeping details. This webinar this afternoon is being recorded so that people will be able to view it on our website and YouTube channel at a later date. But rest assured that the only people appearing on camera will be myself and Kim, and no details whatsoever of any attendees who are watching today will be shown in this recording. We do have a chat function. Many of you are probably familiar with chat on Zoom, but for those of you who are not, if you do have any comments at all or anything that you'd like to mention or to bring up, even just let us know where you're watching from today. Please do use the chat function and put your comments in there. We do also have a Q&A function. So if you've got any specific questions for Kim, please put them in the Q&A function, and time permitting at the end, we'll get to those questions. I must stress, though, if you do have specific questions, please use the Q&A and not the chat, because it's possible that we won't pick them up in the chat. Well, with no further ado from me, I'm now delighted to hand over to Kim. Kim, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Austin. Thanks for having me today. I'm Kim, as I was introduced, and I'm from Michael Page Recruitment. I've been asked to speak with you today because I don't myself I haven't had a stroke, but I have a mild traumatic brain injury that I received in a car smash that I had when I arrived in London in the start of 2009. I've got some images to show you, so I'm just going to share my screen as well. And hopefully everybody can see that. So before my injury, I actually traveled quite a lot. There's some pictures of me dancing, having walked through mud, wandering around the world, principally Europe. There's obviously Amsterdam and unobviously Gallipoli. I also had 2 jobs while I was here. I was working as a steward at Wembley, and I was a sales assistant just at a sofa store. I was just on the verge of changing jobs when it was a lovely autumnal day, very much like this one, and I decided to walk up to the park just to read a book, have a day off, have a good time, live my life. And unfortunately, I was run over at a pedestrian safety island by a drunk driver. So I broke everything. So my back, my pelvis, my right hip, all my ribs, and I had a head injury as well. So there was a significant amount of days in the ITU. On the next slide, I can show you what a rib cage looks like with a tired tread bruise pattern on it. It was not the best day of my life, I have to say. I was extremely lucky that I was airlifted to the Royal London Hospital, and they were able to give me life-saving treatment, both on the side of the road and in the coming weeks at the hospital there. Very traumatic for all the family, obviously traumatic for me as well. Hard to get your head around that sort of thing. And at the start, I honestly didn't realize that I had been injured. My head trauma was quite severe. I received bumps to the front of my head and the back of the head. I remember being asked questions along the lines of, do you know where you are? And I honestly had no idea where I was. So it's really strange that with all the medication that I was being given and with the head injury itself, I really thought I was at school. I thought I was at university. I thought I was in prison. I thought I was in Danny Minogue's lounge room. I had no idea where I was. So While again, it's not a stroke, it's relatable, I think, in that things can definitely change you and things can definitely be quite confusing. While I was at the Royal London, I was not getting as much rehab as I wanted. It's a trauma unit rather than a rehab unit, so that was frustrating. I was trying to set goals while I was there, and it didn't always work out very well because the physios and the nurses and the healthcare assistants always had other people to go and look after as well as me. So this other picture here in front of another hospital, I was transferred to Stoke Mandeville, which is a rehabilitation unit up by Aylesbury. Lots of people with wheelchairs there, lots of people with spinal injuries like me, lots of people with spinal injuries and head injuries like me. But unlike me, not many of them could walk. So my goal, rather than learn to live with a wheelchair, was learn to live with a wheelchair and learn how to walk again. So with head trauma and with a broken back, it's really difficult to get those messages from the brain to your feet to move. I had set a very vague goal to walk and realized along the way that that's a really broad definition of walking. The first thing I had to do was redefine all those things and talk about how to stand up and how to reactivate all the muscles that I needed in relation to moving my legs, moving my feet, moving my pelvis, all that sort of stuff to propel myself forward. It took a lot of work. Along the way, I had to learn how to be less bullish, I guess, about how to live my life. I was always on full throttle. I needed to sit back. I needed to quiet myself. I had to deliberately learn how to accept help when I was used to being the helper. There is a grace in accepting help, and it took me a really long time to learn that. Once I had learned it, I felt as though things started to settle into place for me a little bit. Although keeping in mind, I still hadn't realized that I had the brain injury at that point. I still was very involved with how my spinal injury affected me, how my legs didn't work, how would I live my life in the future. I was, as I said, I was about to start a new job, but that was obviously not going to be held for me. I hadn't actually started there. I hadn't even had my first day yet. So I was now homeless and jobless and mobility-less. So everything was, you know, it's a lot to try and get used to all at once. So with the brain injury specifically, I think it was really the most undiagnosed part of my accident, just because it was the least affecting of my life. But, you know, I went through all the aphasia, I went through the frustration and the anger and the confusion and the lack of clarity and all those things. So all that's affected by medication that you need in order to get out of bed, as an example, or to have your body function in a way that it needs to. That was really a difficult thing to get used to as well for me specifically. You know, I'd always been the sort of person to wander around in nature to heal myself, but it was 6 months in the hospital before I even left the unit. I was too scared to go outside. Once I did, things started to change fairly significantly, which I was lucky for. I started to think about how I wanted to live the rest of my life. I started to volunteer, or I was asked to volunteer with a spinal cord injury charity, which had supported me greatly while I was in the hospital. I nearly said university. Things still get confused. But I realized that there were quite a lot of ways to volunteer that were able or open to me. So that was really lovely. I dangled off a few buildings, raising money for charities by abseiling, doing sponsored events like the abseiling, and also by the sponsored walk there. I did the superhero walk. I actually challenged some of my clinicians to walk or to wheel a kilometre while I walked the 5 kilometres. Some of them took me up on that and some didn't. My lawyer, my personal injury lawyer, did, and I was pleased to see that. Other ways were to raise money by, offering myself as available for charity bucket collections. The big star there I'm quite proud of. I also started to volunteer in an office and won Volunteer of the Year that year. So I was pretty pleased with that. Volunteering in the office came about because I was training to be a mentor for the spinal injury charity. And I had been sitting next to one of the office managers while I was in that training session and telling her all about how I was a horrible employee and terrible to try to manage before my injury. I was stubborn. I'm still stubborn, except now it's called tenacious. And she laughed at me and said, we'd still like to have you volunteer in the office. So I said, I really can only qualify 3 hours a week. I was very full of pain at that point. I was still very full of medication, very full of fatigue and all the effects that go along with those things. She accepted the 3 hours a week. And over the next few years, I really built that up from 3 hours on a Tuesday to all of Tuesday. And then it became all of Tuesday and all of Thursday. I did try to increase that as well, but it became quite apparent to me that I wasn't physically or mentally capable of sustaining those hours and also living my life. So I was extremely lucky to have that support of the spinal charity. They already had lots of people with spinal injuries working there, so they were already ready with the reasonable adjustments that you might consider requesting when you first go back to work. That included things like accessible entrances, accessible bathrooms, time off for medical appointments, extra time to learn how to do your job, so extra time in training. There was also mental health days where you could, take an afternoon off once a month just to make sure you were looking after yourself. So, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better place to start my journey back to paid employment. From there, I actually went traveling again. I kind of quit as a volunteer, went traveling. I did a few months in Australia on a road trip. I started in Melbourne and drove all the way up to Cairns. It took me about 7 weeks to do that. While I was doing that, I had loads of different things to worry about, such as, is the hotel accessible? Will I be able to cope with my fatigue? Will I be able to manage my pain? Will I be able to, cope with any of those things that come up while you're traveling and find a solution for them, such as accessible hotel rooms or campsites or friends' houses to stay in, all those sorts of things. Turns out the answer to that sometimes is no, most of the time is yes, but you don't. I didn't know until I was in the middle of it. So it was quite interesting. I've been brave enough to wing it. I haven't always been like that. I'm still not always like that. But for that particular holiday, it was great. When I came back, I was actually offered a paid role at that charity, virtually doing the same job that I had been volunteering for. So while I had experience of it, and while I had substantial lived experience now with my spinal injury and head injury, I still needed further training in relation to the databases. When I was so confused and found retaining information was so difficult was a lot of work. They were very patient with me, and I think that was because I was very upfront about what I thought I would need and what I knew I would need, and would they be able to come to the party and still have me on board, knowing that I needed all this extra support? The answer was yes. So here we are today, or there we were that day. I wanted to then talk about what things look like when you're making adaptations to your life. So with this particular slide, I can show that I needed walking sticks. I have a wheelchair. I had a really special day on a Harley Davidson, which just happened to be modified into a trike. Some campsites and some music festivals, doesn't matter what you do, that's not going to be accessible in any way. Anybody, even able-bodied people, were going to fall over in that mud. So that was really disappointing. Most of the rest of the time, there's lots of the world that you can still see and do. If you're open to not being able to do all of it. You can still see most of it and still participate in most of it and still have a really good time. I think along the way, what I learned in relation to, all this travel and all the rehab and everything was that I needed to be extremely coordinated in relation to how I was managing my days. It turns out I couldn't just remember what I was doing next week. I needed to write everything down in a diary, including what I was doing on each day of the holiday, as an example, or what I was doing on each day of not on holiday. While I was writing everything down, I realized actually how many things I was learning along the way that I didn't know that I could do, such as managing a team of people. I was coordinating my physiotherapy. I was coordinating physiotherapy with hydrotherapy and personal training and case management and socializing and resting and volunteering and all these things. So I was kind of surprised. It was a big jump to go from, oh, I'm not doing anything in my life, to actually, you know what, I'm participating in the world. I'm adding value to the world by providing employment for all these people that are helping me to walk again, helping me to learn to live my life again, helping me to put myself back together again. And it was really a nice way to think of things. So while I was setting those goals, I also realized that with the help of all those assistants that I had, I was able to refine my goals. So as an example, I could walk from the hotel to Lake Louise, which was maybe 100 meters, but I wasn't able to walk around Lake Louise. So the goal, therefore, was not walk around Lake Louise, it was be at Lake Louise. Other things that I learned were that, you can still live quite a lot of your life with an impairment. I was still enjoying everything. I was still, having good friendships with my friends. But then it was about, at this time, probably 5 years after my initial accident, my brain injury actually healed itself enough to realize that I had a brain injury. At that point, I became overwhelmingly furious. I cannot describe how much anger I had in my life. I keep saying that it was apocalyptic rage and volcanic fury, because I suddenly understood how much of an impairment a mild injury to your brain can be. I lost a lot of confidence. I sank into quite a depression. I needed to motivate myself to seek counseling and psychological input there. I finally succumbed and started to take some antidepressants as well. That helped me to be less overwhelmed and to therefore manage things better. So I had managed my life, I had lived my life, I had enjoyed my life. I had a degree of wellness, but as I said, fell into a bit of a depression. It was all dark. It was very moody. It was a lot of hard work. So while I was working at the charity, I was also trying to manage this fury and decided to leave there for more traveling, honestly. I've been extremely lucky in that traveling has enabled me to learn so much. While I was traveling, I received an email from somebody that I had worked at the charity with, who was now at Michael Page Recruitment, asking me if I'd like to interview for a position there. I was not thinking about looking for a job at that point. So I came back from that holiday. Then COVID happened. Had to simplify my life quite a lot. I was used to really running around and again, doing as much as I could at full throttle. I always felt like I needed to prove a point, that just because I had an impairment and a physical disability didn't mean that I couldn't live my life. Living life became very quiet. I spent a lot of time with my little doggies. They taught me to live in the moment, which was so lovely. Rather than being mindful and still all the time, they could be absolutely bonkers, run up and down the hallway, live with a joy that I could only imagine having. The jigsaw puzzles there really helped me fill my day. It gave me a routine, it gave me a purpose, it gave me more goals. Also had to fit in, sometimes those goals couldn't be met. The sky of that one jigsaw still haunts me to this day, even though it's about 3 years later. I just couldn't finish it. I ended up throwing that puzzle in the bin. I was really mad at it. From there, you know, I really started to think about how we fit into the world, how I fit into the world. I was working really hard on the way I communicate with people. I realized that in the afternoons I get quite tired, and that's when my aphasia really kicks in. As now, example, I'm starting to trip over my words, and I expect some of you might identify with that sort of thing as well. It can be a bit terrifying, especially in this sort of situation. I'm trying to make a good impression, but it is all about the communication, how you say, how you articulate it, what your requirements are, and if those things can be met. So if my friend, as an example, isn't able to carry my wheelchair up 18 steps so that we can get into a cafe, we go to a different cafe. I think with aphasia as well, you know, there's just such a feeling of not so much failure, it's about not being fully complete. So I was managing that. I was managing pain, I was managing fatigue, and it came to me that I was really managing my whole life rather than living it. So yes, I enjoy things. Yes, there's pain. Yes, there's fatigue. Yes, there's confusion. Yes, there's medication. Some days are great, some days aren't. So this period came to an end, as it all does, mostly when COVID was just starting to clear up. I started to work for Michael Page. I was approached by Michael Page, as I said, by the guy that I worked with at the spinal charity. I interviewed for a position which is not the one I'm in right now, which is actually really interesting to start with. The position I've ended up in now is with the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Department here at Michael Page. The idea of working for that department really interested me because I have a lot of friends who are unemployed or underemployed because of their disability, or not given the opportunity for employment because of their disability. Michael Page is really trying to put pressure on companies and corporations to diversify their workforces. That includes people with disabilities, people with neurodivergencies, people who have potentially been part of discriminatory actions in relation to their race or ethnicity or sexuality, as an example. And it's been my job to find people like me who would like to go back to work. Going through the interview process here was really interesting because I had to explain what my limitations were. I had to negotiate that I could only work 2 days a week rather than the 5 days a week they had budgeted for the position. I was very lucky in that my boss particularly has had such an interest in diversifying the whole corporation, basically. And that was championed by our CEO, who had a skiing accident in 2019, who also now uses a wheelchair full-time. He had introduced the department 10 years ago, but it didn't really go anywhere because it wasn't, there was no like personal reason for him to champion the department. It has only been since 2010 in the UK that there's been a proper Equal Opportunities Act. During the last 10 years, we've delved a little bit into women in work and LGBT in work and disability in work, but we really wanted to open up the department and make it everybody in work. The job that I have now that I feel like I'm quite settled in is to make contact with people like you who might be finding it difficult to come back to work into paid employment, and offer CV tips and interview training, and just some coaching basically, so that you can best represent all of yourself rather than just the bits you might expect society to find acceptable. I'm going to go to the last bit here and just point out specifically how beautiful fields of tulips are. The metaphor here is that nature is never imperfect. It's man-made things, and man that sees things as imperfect. So there's these fields and fields and fields of tulips. They all look wonderful, except for that one little one there on the left. Does not look like any of its neighbors, but that does not make it any less beautiful to the world, and it doesn't offer any less value. So, Austin, thanks very much. I think that was everything that I wanted to cover, and would welcome questions.
Kim, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and we've had lots of comments in the chat, and it's really clear that some of your stories and some of the anecdotes and that really resonate with a lot of people viewing this afternoon. So thank you very much for that. I have a few questions to run through with Kim. We have received a few in advance. If there are any others that you do have today, please do pop them in the Q&A, and we'll see if we're able to come on to them. But I guess, Kim, to start with, and looking at this from a perspective with regards to your job and your role at Michael Page that you do now, what more can we do to educate employers and most importantly, I guess, HR professionals of the support, patience and understanding that stroke survivors need when they return to work?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously working with the recruitment agency, my job is to find people who want to go back to work. The rest of the department is actually working to put pressure, like specifically on companies that need to diversify, and that has had really good responses in relation to the presentations that my senior manager has made, the contacts that we've been making. We actually work behind the scenes also with some other recruitment agencies to make sure that we are all inclusive. It's kind of, it's a buzzword at the moment, diversity, equity and inclusion. So the definition of that has only, been more solidified over the last couple of years. So it's kind of an on-trend thing. So yes, we should be pressuring people to make the working environment more approachable for people with strokes or having survived a stroke. But there's also the added thing there in that people want to diversify their workforces. They don't need all that pressure. I think when you're talking about having survived something specific, you can't blanket everything with the same. You can't blanket everything in the same way. So I would make the assumption that one person's stroke is not the same as someone else's stroke. So I would anticipate the question more to be, what can I do to make my requirements more known to the HR person I'm speaking to? And that is, make a list of all the things that you would like, make a list of all the questions that you'd like to know answers to, and have an expectation of what you'd hope to hear from them. If you don't hear that from them, then if you've got the opportunity to offer that education, then do so. That isn't your responsibility, but it doesn't hurt. Also, don't be afraid to hide what your requirements are. So the intent of education is a two-way conversation. It's not just somebody lecturing. It's people learning how to work together more efficiently and more effectively together on a more personalized stance.
Right, thank you. A question now regarding the DVLA, and I understand you're probably not an expert in this area, but we did have a question from someone who said that the DVA cancelled their driving licence due to loss of visual field, and that there's a process to reapply after a year if it can be proved that you've adjusted accordingly. Are you able to offer any advice on this?
I can only offer personal advice. I'm not an expert on getting back to work, but I do know that there are many driving assessment charities and also companies in the UK that offer this kind of driving assessment. So you basically, you ring up, you make your appointment, you tell them what your disability or your requirement is. You would make an appointment, go to their driving centre. I personally went to one in Carshalton. I did not have a UK driving licence at that point. I only had an Australian driving licence. So they would not let me out on the roads, but they did have a driving track there. They had, you know, like a not driving exam in relation to, they were like little video games to check my peripheral vision, to check my response times in both my hands and my legs. Then they put me, or they took me out to the yard, told me to choose a car. For me, I went straight for an automatic with no hand controls because I didn't feel like I needed to worry about my feet too much. And turns out I could drive an automatic car with no modifications, and I was free to apply to the DVLA directly straight from there. I think that they would also have that sort of opportunity for people with vision impairments as well. Actually have a friend who is partially blind in his right eye, and he has had some adaptations made to the mirrors around him so that he can still drive safely and not have any problems with his peripheral vision. So like I said, so anecdotal evidence, not professional opinion, but I'm very happy to provide those links if you'd like to follow those up.
Thank you. A really, really important question now, which I'm sure is, you know, a number of stroke survivors, very relevant for them. When looking to get back into work, should I mention my stroke?
Two answers to that. And the first one is, if you would like to, yes. And the second answer is, yes, of course you should. I actually really like knowing about people. And I think from my perspective, if I'm looking at somebody's CV and I note that there is a gap somewhere, if it's not mentioned at all, then I'm going to make up the craziest scenarios in my head and just assume that you're trying to hide something. And I think with physical disabilities and other protected characteristics, we should be championing ourselves, having confidence in how we present ourselves, and being confident that having a stroke is nothing to be ashamed of. It's part of you. You haven't done it deliberately. There's things to be learned there in relation to how you've had to adapt your life. So as an example, what can I use as an example? My brain injury at the charity job that I had, I was not able to intuitively follow basic instructions. So I actually had someone sit down with me, and I wrote down everything they said, like, this is the button you press, and this is what it looks like, and this is where you go next, and that's how that looks like, and this is the screen that will come up. And that turned into their training manual. So, you know, we took something that was potentially, you know, not a plus, and it turned into something that helped all new starters, not just people with brain injuries. So I think that we need to stop looking at disability as inability and start looking at it as a different ability. So if you have learned anything about your stroke and about yourself and how you adapt to the world, then that can absolutely be referred to in your CV. It absolutely can be referred to in an interview as well. So apart from the training manual, I can also use things such as to get to work, I need wheelchair accessible transport, so I can either get a taxi, which is costly, or I can catch 3 buses and end up in the office at the same time. The adaptation there is that I've had to take 3 buses rather than 1 train. So what I'm saying is basically there's more than one way to skin a cat. And it is absolutely up to you. If you would like some assistance about how to best write that down or how best to present that, I'm very happy to have a chat with you about it. But I cannot stress enough how much all of you, including your stroke, still offers value to the world. You shouldn't hide, you shouldn't feel like you have to hide that. And if you do feel like you have to hide that, then you probably don't want to work for that organisation.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come through in the last few minutes, which I think are partly related to this, albeit from a slightly different angle. Firstly, how do you, and this may not be relevant for yourself, Kim, I don't believe it is in the way you've spoken about Michael Page, but maybe if you do have a take on this, how do you feel with the constant feeling you're going to be sacked when your boss finds out how bad things can be? They, which I presume is this individual's employer, they say I'm doing okay, but I stress that I'm not.
Again, it's like communication is so important. If your boss doesn't know that you're struggling, how can they just assume you are? From a legal perspective, they're not really allowed to ask for your medical history. It's up to you how much you divulge. Obviously, losing your job because of constructive dismissal is sad. It does happen, unfortunately. It is illegal. If you're worried about it, I would either speak to your boss directly or speak to your HR manager. And if things progress in a way that you're not comfortable with, then absolutely seek out employment law advice.
Thank you. And I guess another really important scenario here that's been asked when looking to go back into work, and that's, do you have a view on the risk of taking on a job which you might then discover you're not able to do, but as a consequence then of losing your job, you've also lost your benefit support as well through having gone back into the workplace for a period?
Yeah, so there is an opportunity to keep your benefits. I'm sure you can work up to 16 hours a week, I think it is, and I'm not sure what the maximum payment there is. But you can try a phased introduction and label a phased introduction as a reasonable adjustment. There we go. If you want to figure out how that's going to best work for you, there are actually other charities with benefit calculators that can help you make that decision. It's so tricky, isn't it? It's such a big step to go from being confident to then relying on the state to then taking that big leap. And I think that's a big part of going back to work, and that is that it's terrifying. And sometimes you just have to jump and figure it out when you get there. If you think that you're going to struggle, then don't do it. You don't want to be left out of pocket. It's so difficult. Once you go back to work and drop your benefits, it's really difficult to get back onto them. So yeah, that would be advice. That's the advice is take it easy. Do what you know you can do, and then afterwards figure out what else you might be able to do.
Thank you, Kim. And I believe it's called the permitted work or permitted allowance scheme, and it is 16 hours, and the current rate you can earn on that is £152 a week, I believe, which is roughly what the adult minimum wage is in the UK. Another question we've had come through. My work are trying to ill health retire me, but I'm able to work in an office-based role. Does my employer have to find an alternative role suitable to my capabilities?
So I'm not an expert on this one, but I do know several people who have been ill health retired, and for them it just hasn't been worth the fight to take that to court or seek legal advice or anything. They're a little bit older. The people that I do know, they're in their 50s. They weren't that far off retirement anyway. I think that if you have an office job and you're unable to complete that office job, but then you could do another one, I think that there is an obligation there to find out what your capabilities are. But if you're a lorry driver, as an example, and you're now unable to drive a lorry, there's not any obligation to provide office work there. But again, speak to an employment lawyer or speak to another charity that has that as a specialism as well.
Thank you, Kim. We have had one or two more questions come in that are looking at things more from, you know, a legal perspective and a capability route. Obviously, I understand you're not an expert in that, so I won't bring them up now. What I will say, though, to everyone who's viewing this, is we do have a session tomorrow morning with Laura from Bolt, Baird and Kemp Solicitors. Her session will mostly be focusing on rehabilitation after a stroke, but she'll also be happy to take questions, including questions from a legal perspective and a work capability perspective as well. So I'm sure that we can answer some of them then. Another question we've just had come through the chat. Could you share the different reasonable adjustments that you've used throughout your recovery period?
So the one that the one where I'm working now, like I said, it's a full-time job. I can't do a full-time job, and I know that because while I was volunteering, I played around with the hours on. I ended up working 15 hours a week, but while I was volunteering, I tried doing 3 hours and then 3 hours and then 4 hours and then 4 hours over 4 days. I just couldn't do it, so it ended up being a full day volunteering and then a rest day and then a full day volunteering and then a rest day. And I knew that I could very confidently do that. And that's how I sold myself, if you don't mind that term, to working for Michael Page. And they found that acceptable. I think it's hilarious. They hired me for my personality. This makes me giggle all the time. I work very hard on those 2 days, so I'm quite productive. I switch on for all of Monday, and then I literally sleep all of Tuesday. I switch on for all of Wednesday. I sleep for 3/4 of Thursday. I did volunteer during my interview process that I could potentially work on Fridays as well, but I honestly don't think I can do that. So that the reasonable adjustment was that they were willing to consider how productive I would be within those 2 days. Their obligation then was, rather than put me on as a full-time staff, they put me on as a temp. That was just to work out the contract and payment, just as an example. And it turned out that I'm reliable and they're happy with that. So here I am now on staff. But, you know, other things I was able to negotiate were, you know, some days my body just does not engage with my brain. So, you know, I ring my boss and I'm like, it's just, I need another 4 hours sleep. I'm so sorry. And he's like, yeah, see you later. So I think it's a lot to do with what you absolutely know you can do, what you're very confident to ask for, what you hope the outcome is going to be, how you communicate that, and the relationship you build with your employer and your colleagues. Obviously, or it's not obvious to you, it's obvious to me, I use a wheelchair. So I had to make sure that the office that I would be working in, if I was going to be working in an office, I'm on a remote team, so I work from home. I needed the office to be wheelchair accessible. I needed the bathroom to be usable with a wheelchair, and also if I was using my walking sticks that day, I would also need an accessible bathroom. But then it's also sorts of things along the lines of, if I have a desk too far away from the accessible bathroom, then I would need to be moved closer, and they did that as well. So there's lots of things that you don't even know are open to you until you think about it. So, you know, if you're picturing yourself going to an office, what do you need to survive? What do you need to thrive there? What do you need to feel confident and comfortable? Ask for it. And if they can do it, they will probably say yes. If they can't do it, they have a right to say no. And this technical term of reasonable adjustment is depending on the workplace. What one workplace will find reasonable, another place won't, and it's not specifically policed. A lot of smaller companies, if you're trying to put a bathroom in, like a changing spaces bathroom, or a wider stall with handrails so that you can have assistance to stand up from the loo itself, you know, if they don't have the funding for that, then they're not obliged to, like, if that's going to bankrupt them as a business, they're not obliged to spend that money. But then you also have access to work. That's a government scheme that you can apply for. Once you have had your job offer in writing, you can apply to help to have them provide the funding for those reasonable adjustments.
Great, thank you. Just got, we'll have more questions come through, and we're going to be able to get through today, but just if I could just finish off with a couple more. Do you know anything about the Disability Confidence Scheme?
Yep, Michael Page is a Disability Confident leader. We are the only recruitment agency that meets that requirement. We're actually a leader at the moment. We're being evaluated for platinum, which is the next level up. We are likely to meet that criteria. That's not something I'm personally working on. My director is. So yes, we are very proactive as an employer, and we try to work and pressure other people that we're working with to meet that same accreditation.
And I guess this leads us nicely on to the next one. So your company, Michael Page, is that able to offer help with things such as CV writing, interview practice, and so forth? And if you are able to offer help, is that free, or is there a cost with that?
Free of charge, and it'll all be done by me. So just to manage expectations there, I'm not quite sure how many people you've got present there, Austin, but I only work 2 days a week. So just as an example, if I got 60 phone calls, it would take me a little while to get through them. I am absolutely here for you though. And, you know, if it does get overwhelmingly popular, then there are other people on the team that can absolutely step in as well. So you, with your stroke, would come through my department because we have that understanding that we'll need to represent you in the best way to represent you. If you found a job on our website and went through to a consultant that didn't have the same training as we did, you might get a different interview experience, as an example. So it would be professional, it would be praiseworthy, but they would not have the same understanding of pain and fatigue and doctor's appointments and medications and all those things. So yeah, yep, it'll be me. Send them in, ask me questions. I'm here for you.
Fantastic. Well, I suggest maybe the best way for that is if people, you know, if anyone's interested in this, maybe if you'd like to contact us directly at Different Strokes, and then we can forward them on to yourself, Kim. So what I'll do is I will just pop our email address in the chat for everyone to see. And firstly, so if you would like to get in touch with Kim directly, please do contact us initially at info@differentstrokes.co.uk, and then I know that Kim will be very happy to support you know, CVs and interview practice and so forth. So yeah, please do contact us for that. Please also, if you've had any questions that either we haven't had a chance to come on to this afternoon, or if you do think of any questions subsequently to the session that you'd like us to forward to Kim, again, do please email them to us at our info email address, and then we'll forward them on to Kim accordingly. We had a lot of, again, a lot of great questions, a lot of good comments on the chat, a few mentions of fatigue and to a certain extent invisible effects of stroke as well, and about how that can be really pertinent issue within the workplace. This obviously gives me a good opportunity to plug the fact that on Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, we do have a number of stroke survivors covering fatigue in a panel discussion. And then we have something similar for the invisible effects of stroke at 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. So if those areas are relevant to yourself, and there's certainly a lot relevant to a number of people who's got on the call this afternoon, please do join us for both of those panel discussions. Kim, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic, you sharing both your personal story with us and your professional insight this afternoon. Really do.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think this is the first time Kim's done something like this. So, you know, I know you're a little bit nervous beforehand, but you've come across absolutely fantastically. And it's clear from the comments that what you've said has resonated with a lot of people, and they really appreciate it. So thank you to Kim. Thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate your time. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we have Laura Barlow from Bolt Bird and Kemp Solicitors with us. And then tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we have Anna Carey, who will be delivering a stroke survivor yoga session. So please do join us for those sessions if you can, along with the sessions that we'll be running for the rest of the week. Once again, thank you to Kim. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you here very soon. Bye-bye.